Good day, and welcome to the second season of the Capital Call podcast series, provided to you by CBS Private Equity. My name is Leonard Wiese, and I look forward to talk to Gustav Lauritsen, who's an associate at McKinsey & Company. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about your professional journey at McKinsey and as a consultant in the private equity industry. I look forward to hear what the insights you have for our listeners, but first, could you give us a short presentation of yourself and McKinsey & Company?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. As you said, I'm Gustav. I joined McKinsey 2 years ago. I'm now an associate, working a lot within our strategy and corporate finance practice, which of course entails quite a bit of work with different PE clients and different PE funds. Before I started working in McKinsey, I studied applied economics and finance at CBS and then international business at CBS as well. Besides that, I worked at PwC for a little over 6 years, and then on the more fun side, then I love to play soccer and spend my weekend with my family and friends.
That's great to hear. Thanks for being here. Can you tell us a bit about your professional and academic journey so far?
Back in high school, I actually thought that I want to be a doctor. Figured out that I don't like blood that much. So after my high school, I kind of had to try out what's out there, what's possible. I studied biotechnology in high school, which of course is different than what I do now. So I applied for a job at PwC during my gap year to try out what it feels like to work in business, and it was all I come from a family of doctors and engineers and so forth, so it was something new for me to try out the non-natural science part. And so I tried to work at PwC, got a job, worked as an accountant for a year, which, not to criticize anyone, but not the most interesting job I'd ever had. And but I think the field of the whole economics and finance was extremely interesting. It was just not my strong suit. It was not within the accounting part. It was more related to some of the advisory role that they also have in PwC. So I applied for starting at international business at CBS because I thought it was a fairly well-rounded education where you got an introduction to a lot of different elements that you could use in your professional life. And as a completely rookie like me, then that was the right way to go, I think. So I started at IB, where I was a part of the Globe program, where I got to travel around the world and with a cohort of co-students, which was the best experience during my studies. That was fantastic. The Globe program is a part of the IB program, where you have a cohort of 18 students from Copenhagen Business School, 18 students from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and 18 students from University of North Carolina. And then you spend a semester at each of the universities together with students from all the different universities. So it was a big experience. Pretty cool to go out and see the world together with some of your best friends. My girlfriend, she was also part of a very similar program, so I got to spend and see the world with her, which was super cool. But in the Globe program, you kind of there's a lot of ambitious students, and a lot of them they were applying for the big consultancies. And then I tried to say, okay, why not just try it? And then I got an internship at McKinsey. Decided to go for it, and the whole casing experience and everything, I guess we can come back to that, but luckily enough I got an internship with McKinsey, and it was a bit of a trade-off because at the same time I've worked at PwC. So after I was an accountant, I started working in the financial service advisory department, where we spend a lot of our time helping the big pension funds in Denmark. I was primarily within real estate with their portfolio management, buy and sell different portfolios, financial due diligences, all related to the transaction and to the real estate. Again, it was also super interesting, but I also wanted to try. I mean, there's just so much you can do with the numbers. So I wanted to try the more strategy side as well, and that's why I applied for the job at McKinsey. And then after my internship, I went back to PwC and worked there for the remaining of my studies, because I thought it was still interesting to get a very good grasp of the financials and understand that very thoroughly. And then after I graduated from applied economics and finance, then I decided to join McKinsey, because I felt like now I've been working 6 years in PwC. It's probably good to try something a little bit different. At McKinsey, as I mentioned, I spent the vast majority of my time within our strategy and corporate finance practice, and maybe quickly give a brief introduction to McKinsey about that is that we're of course a big management consulting firm. We're divided into a lot of different practices where I mean, what we're probably most well known of is of course our strategy practice and our strategy and finance practice. But we have a lot of different practices all the way from procurement, sitting and optimizing the procurement process and strategy of an organization, and all the way to helping startups to actually create growth plans and leap studies and so forth. So it's a rather big variety of different services that we provide our clients. My biggest interest also from my background at PwC and my studies was more related to the transaction side. And so I spent a lot of my time with the strategy and the corporate finance, as I mentioned, practice, and done work for large institutional investors, but also their portfolio companies, and and also just the big corporates in Denmark, so the big companies, C25 and so forth. So far, it's been super interesting to try a lot of different things in McKinsey, and that's what I really like about McKinsey, is that you have a project which is usually 4 to 12 weeks, that's the average span of an assignment, but one project can be very, very different from the next one. So it's not like it sounds so cliche, but every day is not like each other, which is pretty cool, because you can have the responsibility of one work stream at one project and then a completely another work stream in another project.
That sounds very, very interesting. And maybe can you explain us a bit more about what especially McKinsey does if you work on a private equity case, like the main task about that?
We the way I see it is that we have 5 different ways in which we can help. I'm now only focusing on the PE space. We have, I think it's 5 major support areas for PE clients. First of all, we do the basic investment screening. So we help fund go out and see, okay, they have their fund strategy, and we help them identify different companies that might fit into their investment profile. We do the market report, the screening on that, and just the whole rounded investment screening part. Then we have also part of the next step in that process, which is the due diligence, where we do the commercial due diligence. That was also the interesting part, because before that I was part of PwC, where we did the financial due diligence. Now I'm on the commercial side, which I think is pretty cool to know how these two actually interlink. But we help our PE clients with the commercial due diligence, which is essentially an assessment of, first of all, the market. Is it attractive? How big is it? Is it growing? Is it in decline? Is it overall an attractive market space to be in? Then we of course also do the assessment on the target company, and how's it going? What is the competitive advantage of that company? What does the value proposition look like? How do we expect it to grow in line with the market, above the market? We're really going down assessing the different dynamics here, and here it's really essential that of course, as an associate or junior associate, we're not really experts on these companies. It's a very wide variety of industries that we play in. So we have a very, very big network of both internal experts in McKinsey and external experts, which help us educate ourselves pretty quickly into a different industry. But that's so rather quickly we can come in and actually have an educated view on what is this company's strength and weaknesses. We of course also do an assessment of the competitive landscape as well. So very back to school to some extent at CBS, where you do this real rounded assessment of a company, and then there are of course some depending on what's the investment case from the PE fund. There's of course some specific questions that they want us to address or want us to investigate, and then finally there's usually an element of assessing the business case. How feasible do we think the management's business case is with this company? Do we think it's a good plan? Or is it just a hockey stick where all the growth is coming in year 5? And it's just a bit of an all-rounded assessment of the target company. So that's the 2 first ones. So we have the investment screening and the due diligence. Then we of course also have the portfolio development of the fund. So again, a plan for the first 100 days, what's going to happen, how we're going to execute on targets, what's our investment strategy, and so forth. Then we also do a lot of work with exit support. So when the fund after the investment horizon have to exit their investment, then we help on what we call a vendor due diligence. And so that's where we do a little bit the same as in the commercial due diligence, but now we are on the sell side. So we present the company that the company that we're trying to sell. we're presenting in an objective matter, but still highlighting some of the big traits of this company with a market report and so forth. And then usually the buy side, they come in with their own own commercial due diligence and try to challenge the different where the two reports are different. And we of course help our client explaining some of the differences between our view of the market and then potentially another consultancy house on views on the market. And then finally, and what we do quite a bit as well is actually strategy, so plain old McKinsey management consulting strategy and development of the portfolio companies. So if one of the big PE clients, they have entered a company, then sometimes they call us and ask for help with a growth strategy or implementation of different things, etc. And then that can again be a very big variety of assignments that we get here. But a lot of the work we do is not necessarily with and up against the PE client. It's actually down in the portfolio company where we work with the senior management in that company to try to push this company a little bit further.
That sounds very broad and very interesting. Maybe something for our listeners too. Can you give us a little example? What types of customers do you usually have and why they consult you as a consultant? Like if you're in a PE firm, why do you consult McKinsey, for example?
If I can give like an archetype of how a customer usually looks, then it's the big PE funds that you know. Usually it's the big PE funds, sometimes big institutional investors, but usually the major private equity funds. Not that often venture capitalists. It's mostly big PE funds that we help. The reason why they choose McKinsey is, of course, they want the best. Because we are an international company, we have a very broad space of, as I mentioned before, internal experts. That's one of the things that I found most fascinating about working in McKinsey. First of all, it's a group of very ambitious and driven people, and of course intelligent as well. But what's most fascinating is actually that you're not more than a phone call away from one of the leading experts in the world on this particular matter. I was once on a transaction where we were working on a target which was, it was very niche, this market, and I was thinking no one has actually ever done any work on this. And then we identified a senior partner who, that's what he's been doing for the past 30 years of his life. And then to bring in his perspective on the market, on the client, or on the target was very powerful. And that's, I think, that's what our clients are wanting. And that's essentially this broad view on this broad database, you can say, of experts and what truly distinguishes us from let's say one of the smaller local consultancies. And then you of course you get some very dedicated consultants, because McKinsey is not your typical 9-to-5 job, and the people working there, they know that, and they're willing to go truly above and beyond for our clients. So that's of course also a factor, but I'm not going to oversell myself here. It's they don't come to McKinsey because of associates. They come because of the big expert pool that we have, and an industry leading experience on very very different industries and topics.
How do you manage to get into like large and well-known institutions such as McKinsey on such a young age?
McKinsey is very well known and very popular to get into, but to be honest, it's just to apply. We're humans, and there is now we're recording this at CBS, and when sometimes you're a student at CBS, you look at these big companies, you say, oh, okay, I'm never going to apply. It's not even a chance, right? So the first step is essentially to just apply for the job. But I think it's important when you're applying and when you're sending in your resume that you show that you're more than just good grades. We're really looking for you're not a good consultant if you just have very good grades. You don't have the same amount of time to sit and dig deep into a very very niche topic as a consultant. You work more. It's a way more agile way of working, which puts some different pressures on, or not pressure, but also pressure, but some other challenges on you as a person. That's why it's important to show that you're a well-rounded person and not just have a spike in the academic, but that you have an interesting job next to it, or you do some volunteering work, or one of the examples I used when I was in the interview process was that I helped my grandmother on how to use Skype. So it doesn't have to be all fancy. It doesn't have to be all not fancy at all. It's just to show that you genuinely care and you're a well-rounded person. Then that matters. And again, it sounds so cliche, but that matters just as much as good grades. So It's apply, see how where it goes, and don't be afraid. It's another person sitting next to you and and on the other side of the table. So I definitely recommend just going in and applying for the job if you think consulting is something for you.
Okay, thank you for the insights. And what make you take the shift at McKinsey and not like another company? You chose to have been at PwC and you want to try something new, but why didn't you apply for like an investment bank, for example? Why do you apply, especially for McKinsey?
It's a good question. What I thought of the difference between PwC and then McKinsey is that PwC is a truly interesting place to work. But then again, in my mind, I was a lot on the numbers side. Of course, we do a lot of financial, or at PwC they do a lot of financial advisory, of course, and that's one of the big, what they're well known of. And in my mind, and I'm not probably gonna scratch someone here, but you can only do so much with the numbers and with the numbers adding up and the liabilities and the assets equaling and so forth. So it's a bit. I wanted to try say, okay, where do you really take the decisions? And in my mind, it was not necessarily the CFO. His role is also changing a little bit. He's not only now a numbers guy. He also needs to be a strategic partner. And I think that shift is because a lot of the organizations, they're realizing that you need to have a very strong strategic view on the market that you're entering. And that's where I think McKinsey is a very unique place to learn that, and consulting in general is a very good way to actually get a hold on the strategic and toolbox of being a consultant. You would definitely also get that in an investment bank. You can say not the problem with investment banks, but there's one problem with investment banks compared to consulting is that we don't do weekend work. That's a very, at least in McKinsey, that's a very frowned upon. And based on what I've heard, at least all the rumors is that you do that quite a bit in the different big investment banks, especially in London. So that was a major thing for me that I like to work. I like to work a lot, but I don't want to kill myself. So that was a big thing. Then the other thing is that I tried to look a little bit into where do I see myself, not necessarily in 5 years, but in 10, 15 years, and then try to see, okay, what's the difference between what kind of toolbox does investment banking versus consulting give you, and what typical career path do you end up on? And of course there are a lot of similarities between here. A lot of different people who've done investment banking and then went into like the industry and did amazing. But there's also a lot of investment bankers who remained investment bankers, who remained in this space for the remainder of their life and their careers, which is interesting. But at least my personal opinion was that to maximize the flexibility on your future career path, if you don't want to be forever at the same place, then I think consulting is a very good way to open up as many possibilities as you can, because the toolbox that you learn in consulting, as I mentioned before, you're exposed to not only a lot of different services and a lot of different problems, but you're also exposed to a lot of different industries. So you get a good glimpse of what is different industries fighting against, what is their main challenges, and based on that you can take a decision on, okay, what interests me the most and what strategic choices and challenges are fascinating me the most. And I think that's where consulting is maybe differentiating a little bit from investment banking, where it's essentially it's a lot of the same work that you do, no matter whether it's in pharma, whether it's in the automotive industry, and within investment banking, it's the same steps that you go through. Whereas in consulting, I think at least that the universe of tasks that you can get is a lot more diverse. That of course means that you're more of at least in the beginning, more of a generalist than an expert as you are in an investment bank. And investment bank, you're more focused on the transaction itself, whereas in consulting, you're probably a bit more T-shaped, that you have a broad spectrum of knowledge. And then you eventually, once you start progressing in a consulting firm, then you start to deep dive a little more into a specific practice or industry. So essentially, the reason why I chose a place like McKinsey and in consulting was to first of all learn the toolbox, and then to keep my options open, you can say.
Okay. What are some of the main challenges you faced during your journey, both academic and professional life?
If we start with starting in a company like McKinsey, then it's a big shift. It's a big shift coming from school, where you have a lot of time, you have all the time you actually want to invest into becoming an expert on a specific equation or a specific topic or something like that. Then you're being thrown into a company like McKinsey. That was a big challenge for me personally, because the pressure and the time is completely different, and it's easy to say and talk about work-life balance and work lifestyle and everything, but for me at least it was a big shift from not being able to completely control my own day. As a student, you have a lot of flexibility, and you can do that, and you can take it the rest of the day off, and then that's very, very nice. Of course, then you also have to work in the weekend sometimes, but you have a very, very high amount of control over your own everyday life. As a consultant, at least in a company like McKinsey, then Monday to Wednesday is reserved to that you power through a little bit, that you work quite long hours, and that's a big shift from not having a lot of flexibility to not having that much flexibility, and not being able to always go to a dinner party with your friends on a Wednesday because you want to. Sometimes you can, if you plan ahead, you can definitely do that, but at least at the beginning I was a bit insecure, you can call it, and I didn't really know when to say that I need to go and see Champions League with my friends now. So it's a bit of a balance. That was a big challenge for me. That was this loss of control a little bit, I felt like. And then probably the biggest challenge is that you go from being good at what you do in school, you go from being, you know how to get an A, you know how to get good grades, to being, at least that's what I feel like, you go from being in the top to being, absolutely rock bottom, and you go from being one of the guys who knows something about what you're actually reading to being the stupidest person in the room for 14 hours a day, and that's quite challenging. And once you wrap your head around that and say, okay, now I'm here just to learn, then you start and people talk about this very steep learning curve, and I can only say that's true. You come in and you start learning from day one how to. Not only just like you professionally, you of course start to learn on how to structure a day and sort of some insights into how you do different things, but also you learn a lot about yourself. How do you handle being pressured? If you're low on sleep, how do you then react? What can you do about it? Who should you talk to if you're feeling down? So it's both professionally and you can say academically. You get and personally you get really challenged, but that's also. That's where you, in my opinion at least, you move yourself and you push the boundaries a little bit. Then you start to say, okay, I can do this, but next time I'm out here, I should do this, and that would make my experience much more pleasant. So I think those were probably the main challenges for me when I had to make this transformation from being a student to a full-time employee. And then of course the fact that you don't have 3 months of summer holiday, that's a big thing. That's actually horrible that you don't have that. No, but that's, again, we're back to this loss of control, or the flexible everyday life that you have. Then that's just very different from being a student, where you have all the time in the world to working full time in a very driven place like McKinsey. So I think that was perhaps one of the main challenges, at least in the past years for me, on the professional side. And then of course every time, at least for me, it's also a challenge working a place like McKinsey, is that every time you enter a new project, you work with a new client that you haven't worked with before, then the first week is always a bit of a challenge, because you come in and as I mentioned before, we have a lot of different industries. We have a lot of, at least as a junior colleague, you're exposed to a lot of different things, which is super cool, but it's also very challenging because you know very little about the different industries that you're initially starting, and you come in with a client who's been sitting with this industry. This is their baby. They've been here for 20 years. They know, everything there is to know about this industry, and then they have hired a company like McKinsey to help them, tell them where to go. And you come in and you have sometimes very little experience, at least as a junior colleague. You have very limited experience in this industry, and it's a big challenge to acknowledge that and speak openly to it about the client, saying that yes, I know I'm give me a couple of days before I have an educated answer to some of your problems, because they of course want to see action right away when you step into the door, because that's what they're paying you for. And that's where I think, at least in the beginning, was a challenge for me, because I thought they were expecting me to know everything. But as I mentioned before, the first week of an engagement in McKinsey is just as much you learning about the industry. So you set up a lot of calls with partners around the world to actually get a hold of what is the dynamic of this industry, where is it going. You read a lot,